Hello, Dolf de Roos here, and today I want to show you 5 extra ways of making money from your commercial real estate that most people probably haven't thought of. And one of the things that sets commercial apart from residential is that it is not uncommon for there to be naming rights associated with a commercial building. Now, typically you'll find this in office towers in larger cities rather than, say, a gas station in some rural town. But if you think of New York or Paris, London, whatever, any big city, often you'll see buildings there and they'll have the name of an insurance company or a bank or a law firm or an accounting firm on them. And those aren't just there by happenstance. People pay money for the naming rights of a building. And you might be surprised at what that is worth. So say you've got a 20-story high-rise building in some major city. The naming rights can go for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because yes, it might be, as we said, a 20-story building and you've got a very well-known accounting firm in there and a very well-known law firm. Well, if that building gets named, then whoever gets directed to that building for any of the tenants there, even a lesser-known tenant, they're going to be told to go to the PwC building, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or the such and such law firm building. And that's going to increase the awareness and the perceived awareness of the tenant who's got the naming rights. Usually the naming rights go to someone in the building, of course. I've known buildings where it's being known as Kodak House, for instance. Well, Kodak is a name that's not as popular anymore. It used to be a word that everyone used. It was used as a verb. People go Kodak around taking photos. But it became a bit of a landmark in a sense. So the naming rights are worth a lot. And even if it's not in the $200,000 league, you're in a smaller city and it's only an 8-story building, you will still have naming rights associated with them. Now, this is especially relevant if you own a building where up until now, there's not been a name put on the building. If you can create the naming rights and sell it to one of the tenants for, say, $20,000 a year, then at a cap rate of 10%, that's worth $200,000. At a cap rate of 5%, it's worth $400,000. That is pretty amazing. That's like creating $400,000 of capital value by exploiting an idea, and that's all it is. And most of the things we do in commercial real estate are just ideas, and we've figured out a way of turning these ideas into capital value. Now, can you bank the $400,000? Well, you probably can't sell the $400,000, although if you sold the building, I don't recommend selling. I think people who sell tend to regret selling. But if you were to sell the building, whereas before, let's say you could sell it for $3 million, now with the naming rights in place, cap rate of 5%, and it's worth $400,000 naming rights, you should be able to sell that same building no longer for $3 million, but for $3.4 million. So in that sense, yes, you've created it. Or if you use the collateral you've got in the building to apply for a new mortgage to do a refinancing job, the new appraised value of the building will be $3.4 million because you've got the rental from the tenants that you had before, but you've got an additional $20,000 a year coming in because you sold the naming rights, or you leased the naming rights. This is something that is undervalued. Never assume that, well, no one would be interested here. Even if you've got a 2-story building and it's only got 2 tenants in it, offer to sell the naming rights, right? It's just a matter of how creative can we be? And if you come up with an idea, no matter how wacky it is there someone who's willing to pay money for it? Now, I'm not suggesting you sucker someone into paying $20,000 for naming rights that doesn't benefit them at all. That's not the point. For most of these tenants, they will reap a greater reward than the cost of $20,000 by having their name on the building. Everyone driving by in the region will see this company's name on it. Oh, I need an accounting firm. I should use them. It's how it works. So that's the first of the ideas that we're going to explore today. Sell the naming rights. You'll be surprised how often you can do it. You'll be surprised how easy it is. And I think you'll be surprised at how grateful the tenants are who are paying you the extra $20,000 a year or whatever it is for you having come up with this idea. Related to this, but quite distinctly different, is the ability to have a billboard on a commercial building. Now, usually your ability to put a billboard on a residential property is limited because of zoning, right? City ordinances, city council rules, whatever you want to call it, they won't generally allow you to put a 10-meter or 10-yard by 5-yard billboard on a residential property. Commercial is different. I know they're cracking down on it, but there is also, I might add, a difference between erecting a standalone billboard on a commercial property, which will probably be fraught with lots of council regulations, and turning the end wall of an existing commercial building into a billboard. In other words, there's nothing necessarily wrong with painting the logo of a company or an image or an advertisement on the end of a building. Now, it depends on what the end of the building is made of as to whether you'd want to do this, because clearly, if the end of the building is largely made of glass, it's windows, then you're not going to want to cover the windows with a massive big billboard. But very often, and you'll see it in any city, any town, driving around, often a commercial building was built. There was a building next door. They tore down the building next door. They haven't replaced it. There's a blank wall there. Or they know that it's a blank wall and it's not going to be any windows there because one day someone is going to build there. So you'll find lots of blank walls. Or maybe it's a massive 6-story building with only 6 windows in it. These things happen. So use your own discretion, and you might be able to find a way of putting some kind of a billboard on the side of a building. And just to give that some perspective, I once looked at a commercial building. It was available for sale. It had been used by a rope factory, a factory that makes rope. And to make rope, you can imagine they take twine. Sometimes it's strands of synthetic material, poly, whatever, those long string molecules. And sometimes they take more naturally occurring things like hemp or whatever, and they need machines that wind it and twine it and twist it. So this building was about 300 yards long and only 2 or 3 yards wide. It was very impractical. And to make matters worse, it did not have good access because it was sandwiched between the busiest highway in the country. It was known as State Highway 1. That was the main thoroughfare going up and down the country. And on the other side, there was a railway line. And what that meant is that it was very difficult for vehicles to come and deliver goods that they might have been storing there or whatever. So the question became, what can you do with a 300-yard long building that's only 2 or 3 meters wide? And there was no tenant for it. After the rope factory left, they tried for a long time to get a tenant and they couldn't find one. And the answer is embedded in the question, or what I've been talking about already. You have to sometimes be creative, and the extent to which you can use lateral thinking will determine your ability to succeed in commercial real estate. That's why anyone who's got a creative mind will tend to do very well. And as some of you might be figuring out already, we converted this building from being a building, a structure that you use to store things inside it or to manufacture something inside it, to a structure used to prop up billboards on the outside. In fact, the walls of the building became the backdrop for a massive series of billboards, and I forget how many we got there, but they were sandwiched side by side. And the fact that it had poor access is good because it was between, you recall, State Highway 1 and a railway line. That means on any given day, there were a couple of 100,000 cars that drove by there. So it's a perfect location for billboards. And for anyone wanting to build that number of billboards there, equivalent to what we had with this massive wall, it would have cost a fortune. And we already had the structure there. All we needed to do was to paint the material, the billboard material on the wall, or stick sometimes they use wallpaper-like material. We just had to prep it so that it could have these things stuck on it. So billboards are a great thing that you can do to commercial property to change it from zero income to substantial income, or from substantial income to even more substantial income. I love this concept of billboards. And if you think that these are contrived examples, that's okay. I love contrived examples, even if you only do one of these things once in your life. Remember, firstly, it's not a one-off lump of income you're generating. It's recurring monthly income. So if you get money from a billboard, you'll tend to get paid monthly. And even with the first idea we had, if you put the naming rights on a building, you'll get paid every year, every month for that. So it's really worth doing. There's another category that is even more ephemeral. It's even harder to grasp and catch. And that is when you sell the air rights to a building. Air rights is where you give someone permission to do something in the airspace above a building. So let me give you a practical example. We were in Sydney. I was actually running a commercial real estate event there, and we went out in the field looking at deals, and we came across a building, I believe it was a 14-story building right beside the Sydney railway station. And it wasn't very well occupied. It was only about 7% occupied. However, it had a billboard on the roof, and this billboard was generating, I remember the number for some reason, 523,000 Australian dollars a year. Now at a cap rate of 10%, that means that having that billboard on the roof made the building worth for no other reason than the billboard, $5 million, a bit over $5 million, right, at a 10% cap rate. It had tenants on the other floors, only 7% occupied, but if we could figure out a way of getting that more fully occupied, 80, 90, blissfully 100% occupied, then the value of the building would have gone up even further. But here's the point when it comes to air rights. That billboard could be seen by, I believe it was something like 80,000 people every morning and a similar number in the evening or something. It was a lot of people. So that's why it was worth the while of advertisers to advertise on this billboard. But next door to us, there was another building, which was some kind of a theater. And it was a much lower building. It fell way short of this billboard. So when we looked at acquiring the building with the billboard, we noticed that they were paying $80,000 a year in the form of air rights to the building next door. And you think about it, if someone else had bought the building next door, or if the existing owners leased it to someone who put some big structure on there tall enough to block our billboard, then no one would be able to see the billboard anymore, and you wouldn't be able to get $523,000 in rent. So they were willing to pay $80,000 of the $523 for the air rights above the neighboring building so that the view of the billboard could not be blocked, because if it were blocked, they would get rid of their $523,000 of income. That's just one example. Air rights might be sold because let's say you've got a high-rise apartment building near the beach or near a lake. And they've got stunning views, of course, of this beach or the lake, the ocean. And let's say there's a series of shops down below, a convenience store and a pharmacy store and a shoe shop, and making it all up. I can imagine a situation where the owner of that land with the shops would collect rental fees for the air rights to those buildings that was paid for by the apartment complex to stop someone building there, which would block the views of the apartments and therefore make the apartments less valuable. So always keep in mind that you can even sell nothing but air and get a handsome monthly or annual income from it. In the case of the building in Sydney, $80,000 a year. That's probably more than they were collecting by renting the space underneath the air rights. But again, you won't be able to do this with every commercial building you come across. But you know what? So what if it's only once in a lifetime? If once in a lifetime you can sell the naming rights that weren't there before, and once in a lifetime you can put a billboard somewhere where you hadn't thought of putting a billboard before, and once in a lifetime you could sell the air rights or lease out or rent the air rights to a building you've got. Just by doing it once, that could change your financial destiny forever. And that's what I love about commercial real estate. We are limited only by our imaginations. And wacky as these ideas are, they happen. So another example I often quote is how once we turned $20 into $2 million overnight. And when people hear this, I've had them say it to me. All right, Dolf, we enjoyed what you said up to now. It all seemed reasonable. We could make head or tails of it. But turning $20 into $2 million overnight, now you've gone off the deep end. That is just too wacky of an idea. We've lost faith in what you're trying to tell us. Until they hear how it happened, of course. And by the way, full disclosure, to go from 20 to 2 million overnight, you probably want to know what on earth was the $20 spent on? Well, the $20 was spent on a bucket of white paint and a brush. I'll say that much. And I will tell you how we turned that into 2 million overnight, but I have to give you a bit of a background first. Firstly, it happened in Jakarta. Jakarta is the capital of Indonesia. Interesting aside, if you're talking about real estate and ongoing and relentless increases in real estate values, it was announced a couple of years ago that the Indonesian government was looking at relocating its capital, starting from scratch on a new island, the island of Borneo, actually, in a part of Indonesia known as Kalimantan. They're going to build a new capital. And then it was confirmed just a few weeks ago that they are actually going ahead because Jakarta as a city is sinking. It was built on swamp ground. And not only that, it is known as the most congested city in the world from a traffic perspective. So Greater Jakarta, about 10 or 15 million people, a huge number of people. The roads weren't designed originally to take the volume of traffic that they now have. So it literally means that when you talk about going somewhere, you don't measure the distance in terms of kilometers or miles. You measure it in terms of hours it would take you to get somewhere. Oh, I have to go to such and such office. Well, that's a 3-hour journey. That's a 2-hour journey. And believe me, when you travel in Jakarta, The distances aren't that great, so the fact that it takes 2 or 3 hours means you're crawling along extraordinarily slowly. And you might say, well, why don't you just get out of the car from the traffic jam and walk? Well, there are two challenges. One is the sheer heat and humidity. It's very difficult to walk for any length of time in that heat and that humidity. But secondly, lots of other people are walking. The footpaths or sidewalks are pretty congested as well. So usually that's not a very viable option. So you measure how long it is to go somewhere in terms of hours. And the distance from the CBD, the Central Business District, to the airport, it should be a 45-minute drive, but it can take anywhere from 3 to 6 hours depending on traffic. So for a tenant inside a commercial building in the CBD, if they have a 9 a.m. board meeting, they probably cannot book a 2 p.m. flight from Soekarno-Hatta, the local airport there, the international airport in Jakarta, because they may not make it in time to go through security and check-in process and all that. So that's a restriction. So we spent the $20, as I said, on a bucket of paint and a brush, and we went onto the roof of this client's commercial building. And the roof happened to be a flat concrete roof. And we painted a big white circle. And in the middle of the circle, we painted the letter H. Some of you've got it. We turned the roof of the building into a helipad. And our full disclosure, we needed Civil Aviation Authority approval, which is their equivalent of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority. And that involved dinners and promises of a few helicopter rides and a few other things like that. But we got permission for a helipad on this building. And now the journey to the airport was 15 minutes. You could go by helicopter. And of course, rentals in most of the world are done in square meters, and the local currency in Indonesia is the rupiah, and it's about 14,500 rupiah to the dollar. So everyone's a billionaire in Indonesia, kind of. But when you convert the rental per square foot from rupiah per square meters into US dollars per square foot, the rental used to be about $14 a foot. And by putting the helipad in, the rental went up to about $16 a foot. Now, full disclosure, about half the tenants were happy to pay the increased rent because they knew they would probably avail themselves of the services of this helicopter service to the airport. The other half knew that they probably would never use the helicopter to get to the airport, but they were still happy to pay the increase in rent because they had bragging rights. They could say, yes, well, our building, it has helipad access to anywhere you want to go. It's sort of this status thing. So be that as it may, the rent went from $14 a foot to $16 a foot. And again, converted from square meters, the building was approximately 100,000 square feet. So 100,000 square feet times $2 a foot increase in rent results in an increased annual rental of $200,000. And at the then prevailing cap rate of around 10%, $200,000 extra rent divided by 10% cap rate means the building went up in value by $2 million. And again, I'm telling you, the value that you create in commercial real estate is largely what you create inside your head. That is why I always say the most valuable piece of real estate is the 6 inches, give or take an inch or two, between your right ear and your left ear, because it's what you create in that space that ultimately will determine your net worth, your income, your ability to generate more wealth, your ability to take time off. It really is worth thinking about. So we've seen all these ideas where you can turn a mere idea into money. The idea of giving a building a name and then having someone willingly, you're not forcing anyone to pay you money to have their name on the building, but ego comes into a lot. In fact, we often say that one's ability to succeed in life is dependent on the ability of that individual to suppress their ego. And many people have an ego, they want to see their name in lights. So yes, they will pay big dollars to have their name or their company name on a building. And you can cash in on that by selling those naming rights. You can put billboards there, as we've seen. You can sell the air rights to a building. And you can even put a helipad on the roof of a building and increase its value. And by the way, again, I say you can't do this with every building, obviously, but we've done it with estates too, like residential properties. We had a residential property, I forget what it was going for, but something like $700,000. And then we put a helipad in the garden. And what that involved is ordering a concrete mixer truck to come and deliver some concrete on a Saturday morning. And he duly arrived, and it was the lady of the household who said, oh yes, could you dump the concrete in that hollow there next to, that area, you can see it over there. And he said, somewhat not very politically correct, well, is it all right if I could speak with your spouse for a moment? And He came out and said, yes, absolutely, just dump it there. So anyway, he put the concrete there, they flattened it out, they let it dry, they painted the white circle and the letter H on it. And the concrete cost something like $800 delivered and all that sort of thing. But the value of the property went from $700,000 to $750,000 because now it had a helipad. And even if no one would ever avail themselves of the use of this helipad, the fact is that in the listing you could say it was a country estate, it had 4 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms, whatever, and 20 acres of paddock. And by the way, it had a helipad in the field. It suddenly changes it. So I'm not saying you can do that with everything, but to the extent that you can, it does change the value. That's it. I'd give you 5 ideas. I've got a 5th one here for you. And that is, if you can get a zone change, if you can get the city, or the city council, whatever you want to call it, your local authority, your taxing authority to agree to a zone change, then often the fact that that property has got a different zoning will increase its value way beyond the cost of you being involved in engineering or causing that zone change. So to give you some practical examples, I've sometimes bought houses. Now remember, I'm the commercial guy. I love commercial real estate for reasons that I'm sharing with you here. But if I know that there's going to be a zone change so that the properties on the street, to be more specific, the houses on the street can now be used for commercial purposes. Usually you can't turn a house on what used to be a residential street into a heavy-duty industrial place where they do panel beating or smash repairs or car repairs after accidents, whatever that's called. But they might be light commercial activities, like an accounting office or a law firm or a hairdressing salon, or maybe more retail places like a restaurant food or a wine bar or something like that. If you can get that zone change, the value of the property can go up enormously. And here's the thing that I find just so fascinating, and that is that if you know about a company and they're about to do a takeover or something, and you use that information on that company to buy or sell their stock according to what your expectations are, and you cash in on that and you make a lot of money from that, that is considered insider trading. And insider trading is illegal. But if you sneak along to a council meeting and overhear that there's going to be a zone change on a particular street, and you act on that by buying up those houses, and it's discovered that you sat in on that meeting sneakily, there's no law against it. In fact, you don't even need to sit in on the meeting sneakily. You can be there as a member of the public. You don't even need to be there yourself. You can pay someone, however much they're willing to receive, $15 an hour to go to that meeting and find out the streets where there's going to be a zone change. You don't even need to send anyone to the meeting. You can watch the meeting online on the internet, or you can get a transcript from the meeting, or you can get a service that will tell you which streets are going to have a zone change in them. And if you act on that, there is nothing reprehensible about that. Why mess around with things that are against the law when you can make a ton of money doing things that are perfectly legal? So yes, when there's a zone change in the works and you buy a house and you change it from a residential property to a commercial property, suddenly not only is the rental level going to be higher, in other words, the rental per square foot will be higher, but you get all those advantages that we've discussed before of commercial real estate, such as the fact that in addition to paying you a base rent, the tenants tend to pay their share of the outgoings, the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance. It becomes effectively a triple net lease. They pay rent in addition to those outgoings. Triple net means net of those 3 items. They will pay those in addition. It's kind of sensational. It's so good that I can't for the life of me figure out why more people don't do it. And part of my mission in sharing all these advantages of commercial real estate is to make people realize, wow, I never realized that. I never realized you could legally do insider trading on real estate. I never realized that you could sell the naming rights. I never realized that you could paint a circle on a roof and increase the value by $2 million. If that doesn't juice you, if that doesn't excite you, you've got to do something else. But as I always say, folks, if you can't put your head down on your pillow at night and say, today was just a blast, what a great day, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. If you can't do that, it's time to do something else. All right, hope you've enjoyed this. I look forward to seeing you again very soon. And in the meantime, I want to wish you, as always, successful investing. Thank you.